Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by The Draft Professor. The Draft Professor is a group of podcasters bringing you daily draft podcasts and is home to the only dynamic mock draft simulator which allows fans to mock draft against other fans. The Draft Professor Simulator features a first-round challenge, 5 unique one-round drafts. The Draft Professor Simulator features a second-round challenge, 10 unique 2-round drafts. All mock drafts are always picking against the fans and draft analysts which use the simulator. Every mock, every pick, every time. The Draft Professor also features ranked players functionality, where you can rank your favorite players at every position. Optionally, you can add tiers to your rankings to show what round you have the players graded in. The Draft Professor also features Draft a Team functionality, which allows users to snake draft a team of 22 players to demonstrate your my guys, compare player strengths, and discuss draft prospects in a way no other mock draft simulator can. Thank you for tuning in to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. This episode will begin shortly. Well, welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. I am joined by David, Randall, and Sam. And how you guys doing today? Sam, good to have you back.
Jim, great to be back. Looking forward to maybe bumping into you in Mobile next week.
Absolutely. David, are you going to Mobile too?
It depends on what happens with the Eagles. So I'm hoping I don't, but you never know. I might be there. If I do, it'll be Tuesday morning.
Got it. And Randall, good to see you again.
What is going on? Ready to talk Philly.
So this episode, we're going to discuss the Philadelphia Eagles roster construction. So every podcast this week on the Draft Professor is how did one of the final 4 teams get here? And we're more focused on the roster construction, the salary cap, the head coach, the GM, those types of things. We're not going to give you a game-by-game recap of their season. So we're going to focus on the roster for this. I'll kick off the conversation by just sharing a little bit of data on the Eagles. So in 2021, the Eagles had 31 draft picks on their roster. And then in 2024, the Eagles had 31 draft picks on their roster. And 10 of those players were the same from 2021 to 2024 that the Eagles drafted. And the reason why I point that out is that 10 players that carries over a 4-season span, that's kind of your gold standard, I would say, for a playoff team. So most of the playoffs teams were at 9 or 10 players that they have as like a core. And then a little bit more data on the Eagles. They have 6 All-Pros on their team. They drafted 15 of their starters. They acquired 4 by free agency. They acquired 3 starters by trade and 1 starter by UDFA. Sam, as you look at like the Eagles roster construction, does anything stand out to you about that?
Well, the home runs they kind of hit in the second round over the course of their time. They've hit a lot of great second-round picks. Primarily guys like Jalen Hurts, Dallas Goedert, Miles Sanders, Landon Dickerson, Cam Jurgens, Cooper DeJean. They've hit a lot of second-round picks around this time, which makes their roster fairly cheap and easy to continue paying some of the more talented players they have. So I think the ability to hit and find those second-round gems when in the past you maybe had some issues finding guys in the first round, but recently you've been better at that. I think that's really what stands out to me because it's a very cheap contract, easy to digest, and it opens up cap room for them to spend on some of these big player names. That makes it easier to go trade for a player like A.J. Brown and fit him under the salary cap and get his deal redone when you need to be able to afford these star players and keep these all-pros in place. So they've done a great job there. And, of course, just the investments in the trenches. They've invested so much up front, both the offensive defensive line. You look at where they draft DBs, they don't draft a lot of DBs up until this year. Like that's historically they buckle the trend here. The last top 100 defensive back they took in the draft was Sidney Brown in 2023 at 66. Prior to that, the top corner they had taken in the top 100 was back in 2017 with Sidney Jones. And they go out and they get two guys who are playing nickel and corner this year in the top 2 rounds. And obviously, it's been a huge boost to their defense. So I think that's 2 trends I found quite interesting. One that kind of bucked in recent years. And the other one, finding those second-round gems that's continued to kind of play out here across the course of Howie Roseman's time with the team.
Cool. Randall, anything stand out to you with how they built their team?
Yeah, I mean, to piggyback on that as well, because, I mean, they are hitting those draft picks, which is great, but they do invest in those trenches on defensive line and offensive line. You know, they're using, roughly around 16.5% on average of their cap on offensive linemen. They're doing 16% on their defensive linemen sort of thing. So they invest in those trenches. That's clearly the most important thing. But also that when they hit those picks, you can tell a drop. You know, using Hargrave and Fletcher Cox, using those contracts when they were consistently successful, and then being able to draft somebody like Jalen Carter can mimic kind of those GM caps and be able to reestablish different caps on the other side. You know, with Jalen Hurts and the quarterbacks, the way they handled Carson Wentz and Jalen Hurts, they did it right at the right time. And how Howie Roseman handled those 2 contracts to be able to stun a percentage of that cap on the QB to spread it the other places was pretty impressive.
So, David, how close do you think we've kind of summed up being all of us are outsiders to the Eagles? How do you think we've summed it up?
I mean, I think y'all pretty much nailed it. I mean, and that second round that Sam was mentioning, that goes back like 2.5 decades. I mean, you could go back to like Brian Dawkins being a second round pick. I mean, it's been over and over that has happened. The one thing they also do, like Howie's strength, in my opinion, is moving on from a mistake. Like they made a big mistake in 2020 when they took Jalen Reagor ahead of Justin Jefferson, but they identified it immediately. So in the following year, they went up and they drafted Devontae Smith in the first round. A year later, they used another first round pick to acquire Devontae Smith and AJ Brown. So position solved pretty quickly. You know, they do their best to get ahead of curves. They identified that the wide receiver position and the defensive tackle position were going up in price. And if you look, they have exponentially increased the value. The value of a wide receiver for the top 10, best players in the league from 2019 to now is increased dramatically. The defensive tackle position has increased 69% in the past 4 years for the top 10 paid at that position. So they try to identify those types of trends, and then they pay in free agency for positions that are not premium. Like they try to buy a linebacker like Zach Bond this year at $3.5 million. They try to get a safety because those positions in free agency, linebacker and safety, are not as valuable. They don't cost as much money. So they try to draft the expensive positions and pay for the ones that, that are a little cheaper. And I think I gave you that chart. The top 10 contracts at DT was 13.1 million in 2020 for the top 10. And in 2024, it's already 22.1, which was a 69% increase. For comparison, the edge rushers was at 17.6 back then, and it's only 22.2 now, which is only a 26% increase, which kind of goes with that 10% increase that you're getting almost every single year with, the salary cap. So that, that's gone up 43% and, over 5 years, if you remove, the COVID year out of that. So yeah, I would say that's been, pretty much the key to their success. And they always try to draft 1 or 2 years in advance. They never leave a premium position open. Like they don't go into a draft thinking, oh, we have to have this or we have to have that. And the positional values matter, and they matter big to them. And Randall mentioned the cornerbacks. I think it was you mentioned how they haven't drafted, or it may have been Sam, in years going back to 2017. And prior to that, they hadn't taken a corner in the first round since 2002 with Lito Shepherd. That was the last time they had drafted a corner in the first round. And the reason for that was because they have an organizational belief that corners do not hit at as high a rate as a lot of the other positions. So they were never willing to take the risk in the draft because they didn't think that it was just too big of a risk. And then the one time they did try it was Sidney Jones. They thought they got a steal because he was hurt. They thought they had a first round talent with the second second round price, and it blew up in their face. So they shied away from it. So they'd been doing these deals, getting Ronald Darby and, all these free agents, or they would buy one in their prime, like Asante Samuel, who worked out great. Nnamdi Asomugha, not so much, so it's a position they stayed away from. But yeah, I think that has been, the biggest common denominators amongst what Howie did. And a lot of that he learned from Joe Banner prior to him.
Yeah, so there is definitely a trend across the Final Four teams. Every single one of the Final Four teams has at least one free agent starter on the offensive line. Right? I believe the Commanders have 3. Buffalo has 2. The Eagles have Becton. And then the Chiefs have, I believe, both starting tackles were free agents.
And Becton wasn't supposed to be their starter. They drafted Tyler Steen with I guess it was a 3rd round pick. Yeah, it was a high pick, like 70 something. But yeah, that's who they drafted him with the intent of taking that position over. But Becton's just kind of a freak. And he just came into training camp and just won the spot. And also, they have one of the best O-line coaches in the league developing these guys. I mean, I don't know a better story than Jordan Mailata, a guy from Australia who had never played a snap of football in his entire life, who turns into an all-pro. I mean, that's just amazing. And they've benefited from that and just exponentially. I mean, that has been an unbelievable hit for them. And he just keeps finding ways, Stoutland, that is, just like Becton, he just keeps finding ways to, bring these guys around. And they have leaders like Kelsey, who was at camp. Even though he wasn't with the team, he was at camp almost every single day sitting there trying to teach Jurgens, because he went out and scouted him. He handpicked him. He advocated for, the team to, draft him. So he didn't want his name, going in the mud there. So he stuck around to develop him. So I think that's been a big strength, like y'all both mentioned as well, was the trenches. They go there first every time. And then this draft coming up, I suspect you'll see him go there again with the defensive tackle, because they're likely losing Milton Williams in free agency to that big money we were talking about, because they're not going to pay it, because they got a Jalen Carter contract looming that's going to eat up a large percentage of the cap space.
So, Sam, did you see any other roster building trends beyond the detail of your original introduction?
I did want to highlight, and I think we touched on this a little bit, but the Eagles are unique in a way that I don't see from as many teams around the league, where they have their pillars, and their pillars are there for a decade plus, and they have like 4 to 7 of them at a time, which is just really unique to see that. And I happen to have a lot of friends who are Philly fans, so maybe I'm just around it a little bit more than I am with other teams. But when we think about the guys they've had from, Kelsey and Lane Johnson, the offensive line, and you have Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham on the defensive line, be able to have those core guys in your locker room and be able to have guys like Fletcher Cox, who's the team, bringing him back a year out, bringing back Brandon Graham with some short-term contracts. Jason Kelsey basically putting off retirement for 3 years, essentially, to come back year after year and play for the team. You really establish a continuity on that unit, and you establish a culture that allows you to assimilate some of these young guys in, get them up on the program. And then when these guys do retire, you have people who are able to step up. You have Cam Jurgens ready to step up. You have Jalen Carter being able to step up. He came into the league with some maturity concerns out of Georgia, but things have been mostly stable overall in terms of off the football field for him now. Being able to have that veteran identity in the locker room and then drafting underneath it to replace guys a year or two ahead of time, or have the guys be able to mature and develop a year or two ahead of time before you need them, has been a massive trend for them. And it's been some of the smartest drafting, I think, overall. Howie had, I would say, some more missteps towards the late 2010s, early 2020s, where you had some more questionable drafts. But recently, with the way he's been trading around and moving in the draft class, because he's been trading a lot more in recent years during the actual draft itself, but the way he's valuing picks, the way he's kind of moving around and accumulating draft capital for future years, then taking as many bites out of the apple as possible and increase the likelihood of him finding prospects, finding guys on day 2, day 3, will then be cheaper contracts as well. That's all been incredible for him. So I think he's done a really good job evolving his process, both in terms of evaluation and in terms of how he actually approaches trades during the draft versus where he was even 5 years ago. Because what they're able to do now with him trading back frequently, and they'll trade back a couple picks, and he'll bundle picks, move up if he finds a certain player he likes is falling, or he'll even trade those picks, bundle them, and trade them back into next year's draft. So he'll stock up more picks for next year so he can do it all over again. And it's really impressive to see just how much he moves around the board, sometimes it seems like a little bit of madness. Maybe you're overthinking things a little bit, but then you look at the long-term plan, look at some of the pieces they're able to acquire in the later rounds, and you say, okay, maybe there's something to this here. When you get Tanner McKee in the 6th round, who is not like a second contract player, but is a serviceable player, and you take a shot on a quarterback late in the draft. They've done this a couple of times where, hey, that pick returns value. Even if he doesn't make a second contract, it's worth having a young quarterback on the roster. You get a guy like Moro Ojomo, who got a couple snaps this past weekend, who I like quite a bit coming out of Texas, who's an undersized, athletic defensive lineman for you. And you might be losing Milton Williams. So maybe Moro Ojomo plays more snaps for you going forward. Grant Calcaterra has taken a decent number of snaps across the course of his career. He's a former 6th-round pick. So I just think that trading around, that movement, and the process by which he approaches the draft has really evolved in the past 3 to 4 years specifically.
I like that call out to stockpile picks a year out, because while I haven't fully, let's say, analyzed that with Buffalo, I know that it's true at least last year and this year. Right? Like Brandon Beane came out of last year's draft with a lot of 4th and 5th and 6th round picks this year, kind of thing. So I'm going to go back and look at that. I also know, just from having to build a draft order for a simulator, that Kansas City, Buffalo, and Philadelphia always tend to have, it feels like an extra 4th, 5th, or 6th. It just always feels that way.
Yeah, that's kind of my question for David, because I didn't dive into comp picks. And Buffalo pretty much got into the comp pick bingo about 2021 is when Brandon Beane started being able to take draft picks and either let them walk. I mean, pretty much the first big comp pick would be Tremaine Edmonds when it went to Chicago, and we got a 3rd round out of there. And then we're starting to stockpile those comp picks up, which is great. And it's kind of that trend that's getting into it, especially when you're talking about running backs, how you guys pulled the trigger on Saquon Barkley, and everybody was concerned about the $37.75 million figure. Turns out it was obviously pretty clear. And when you bring up Calcaterra and the tight ends, I'm curious to see if he follows that trend in a tight end. And do you think that they use a draft pick in the top 4 rounds on a tight end this year, and they evolve into that situation, a better 12 personnel and things along those lines?
Yeah, I do think they're going to draft a tight end in the top 4 rounds. I think if you look at like where they grabbed Ertz in the 2nd round, and when he turned around 30, they grabbed Dallas Goedert in the 2nd round. And I think Goddard's about 31 now, so I think they're right around that range, which is what they do. I mean, I used to write every year during the draft. They tell you and show you who they are every year, and nobody just wants to believe them. Like they do the same thing every 4 or 5 years. It's just a constant, trend, and nobody wants to believe it for whatever reason. And you made a good point as well, Sam, talking about the future draft picks. Howie had mentioned that he thought that was vastly underrated in the NFL, that teams didn't like trading for future draft picks on draft day. Everybody was hoarding, that current draft. And he thought it was something that he could exploit, and he did. And I agree. I think more teams are starting to do that now. And I'm not saying he was the trendsetter in it, but it's something that he came out vocally about, that he saw that as a missed opportunity for other franchises. So yeah, I do think that plays a big role. But yeah, as far as tight end, I would be stunned if you don't see them draft one in the 2nd or 3rd round.
Has Howie ever traded a future year draft pick for a current year draft pick? Like trade a 1st next year to move up and get a 1st this year?
I can't recall of one. He has traded current year picks, like when he moved up for Jordan Davis. He moved up for Devontae Smith. And I think he gave up a 3rd. I don't know. I can't think of a time where he traded a 1st round pick other than for AJ Brown, like he did it for a player. But
that's the. You answered my question very well, but it's actually the anti-trend, because I think if we go back, I think we're going to see that the Final 4 teams are not trading a future year's draft pick to move up this year. They use current year picks to move up current year. They don't use future year picks to trade up. Brandon Beane said something to that effect in his draft press conference last year is that he said he doesn't like giving up a future year first because you don't know what that draft class is going to be. You don't want to give it up. He says,
Right.
I'll give up a lot of picks this year, but I don't want to give up my pick next year.
Even when they traded for AJ, they had 3 first-round picks that year. So it wasn't like it was their only
Right.
pick. They had gotten a first-round pick for Carson Wentz from the Colts. I can't remember. They made some other deal in 2021 where they shuffled around with Miami. I think they took Waddle high, and somehow they gave us a first-round pick as well. So yeah, no, he has hoarded draft picks like that a lot. He very much values the future years. He sees that as a way of controlling the cap. It's like Sam said earlier, they intentionally do this. Now they'll move all around the board on draft day, and like it is a little maddening sometimes because he'll just shuffle things. You're not even understanding what he's doing, and you'll think he missed out on a lot of good players. There's a lot of times where I'm like, man, this guy was here. Why did he trade down? And then he ends up with 2 guys who end up contributing on your team, like with the Jomo in the 7th round or Grant Calcaterra, like you mentioned in the 6th, and you're like, good grief, So he always proves me wrong. So I don't really say much when that's happening anymore. But yeah, he definitely values those future picks. And I'll admit, I'm so tunnel visioned on the Eagles. I didn't even realize what you had mentioned, Jim, about all 4 teams doing that. But that's a really interesting concept because I've noticed some other similarities amongst the 4 teams as we've gotten to that this week, and I hadn't looked into like the draft or the trading of picks as part of the reasoning that all these teams end up being in the position where they are. And a couple of like the Commanders are new to this. The Reed, I almost see that as an extension of the Eagles in some way because the Eagles still copy a lot of the things that he brought to that franchise. I mean, Howie's been with the team since around 2000. He was under Reed for years, and even when he was GM under Reed, he was not the GM. Like Reed still had final say on the roster and things. So he had the title, but he did not have final approval of the players. So I'm not surprised that Reed's in the position he is, and the Eagles are either, because they just seem very hand in hand. They do one thing different though is the cap. The dead cap space. The Kansas City is extremely different in that, but a lot of the other things and the way they build a roster will be very, very similar because you'll see their Andy, when he first got to Philly, said, give me a quarterback, an offensive lineman, an edge rusher, and a corner, and I'll figure out every single other position. And he's kind of just stuck to that. If you look at his drafts with McDuffie and Jones and Patrick Mahomes, that was his concept, and the Eagles put a lot of weight into that too.
Yeah, so David, do you want to explain the percentage of dead cap and how you think this is an advantage for the Eagles?
Yeah. As you can see, in 2020 was when they went crazy. In 2021, pre-COVID, the league averaged around 12% of their cap and dead money. Since 2021, the league average has been about 30%, I think. This does not include this year because I haven't done those numbers yet, but the Eagles do not see dead cap space as a failure. They see it as a feature. And that sounds crazy to some people, but it is how they look at it. Not only do you pay the money interest free, but the salary cap raises every year, which makes the same amount of money interest free. It's worth more in the future. Howie said that a quote of his was, it's all the same amount of money. It's just when you choose to pay it. From our perspective, it feels like the cap is going to, just keep going higher. So it makes sense to have the option to pay it in future years. And an example I can give is like, if you make $50,000 a year and you know that you're going to receive a 10% raise every year, like the NFL cap averages going up, your $50,000 in 5 years is $80,000. So if you borrowed $2,000 and 5 years later and paid it back, it'd be, if you paid it the first year, it'd be 4% of your money. But if you wait 8 years and pay it in future, it's only 2.5% of your cap. So he looked at all those little advantages and, they just mattered. And it allows them to spend more in the current year. It's only come back to bite them once. And again, that was in 2020 when the cap reduced. But it took a worldwide pandemic for it to bite him. So I think that's a risk he's going to continue to take.
Yeah, I mean, a good example of that is baseball, to be honest with you. Deferred money in baseball is exactly the same mentality as like for Shohei. He's making barely $2 million a year sort of thing. And then once he's out of that contract, once he's out of those years, then that's when he starts getting paid. And they just put that into to let it invest while those 10 years as he's playing. And that initial money is now worth it, how much his contract actually is. So that money now is legitimately exactly what they need to pay him in the future. And that's exactly what they do.
Yeah,
Little book out of baseball.
Yeah, and everybody's hating on them, but they're signing every free agent that's available in the market this offseason.
If they don't win.
Well, and one thing that makes this strategy more sustainable is because they draft so well, and they've been drafting so well because they've been able to replace those key positions, those premier positions. You have guys who are now, especially on the defense side of the ball, who play these premier roles, making pennies on the dollar compared to the second contract players you have.
Right.
You look at some other teams around the league who use more dead cap or use some more creative contract stuff, like the Saints, who have not drafted well in 3 to 4 years, and you see what happens to their roster when they don't draft well, and you have all these aging players under contract. So that's like there's some risk certainly what they're doing because they've drafted so well. They've been able to avoid all that and get all the benefits of being able to draft and have these star players, but also have all these guys on rookie contracts, especially on the defensive side of the ball. If you look at just average annual salary, they have, I think, no one on the defensive side of the ball in the top 10 for their position. But you look on offense, it's A.J. Brown, Dallas Goedert, Saquon Barkley, Jalen Hurts, Lane Johnson, Jordan Mailata, Landon Dickerson, all in the top 10. And then no one on defense because they have so many young pieces on that side of the ball. And they have just as many stars over there. But that just showcases how well they've drafted and how well they've been able to manage allocating those assets and knowing where they put their money and then where to put the draft picks to be able to level everything out.
And I think they have the youngest defense in the league right now. So that's playing into what you're saying. Like all those draft picks playing, I think they have the youngest one. That's a big part of it. If you have that graph with Devontae Smith and Landon Dickerson's extension, because not that one.
No. Okay. So I thought I only had 3.
All right. I can find it on mine. So I have one.
Even if you look at like what Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown, because A.J. Brown got double extended, am I correct? He got an extension with the trade, then they extended him as well. And then you look at Jalen Hurts' contract as well with his extension. I mean, this year he's a $21 million cap hit for a $155 million contract sort of thing, or whatever the contract was. But $20 million cap hit. A.J. Brown still a $17 million cap hit after you got traded him on a double extension. And then they have that final year. All their outs are 27, 28, where there is nothing guaranteed left. Basically, the way Howie Roseman does it, which is genius, and Brandon Beane does this a little bit too, is those last 2 years are basically not even they're inexistent to where you cut, you save about 80 to 90% of the money. So now it's just basically the wide receiver or any player going into negotiations that year, but then you still hold the leverage on the Eagles franchise. So it's brilliant. And it's definitely the trend that most teams are going, but they got ahead of it with Jalen Hurts, and be able to have somebody like Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown only accounting for $38 million is pretty unreal.
And they have to pick the right players. Like they do that, but it's with 10, 12 players, like Sam mentioned earlier, it's like a core. And that's who they're, doing that with. Everybody else is expendable. Like the new Dickerson deal and the Devontae Smith deal, the extensions were both 4 years. Dickerson's was $84 million. Devontae's was $91 million. And if you look at the way he constructed it on a 5-year contract, the first year, they both count at 8% of the cap hit. The second year, they're at 12% of the cap hit. The third year, one was 16, one was 17% of the cap hit. Year 4, 21%, 22% of the cap hit. And year 5, those dummy years, that's where those dummy years come in, where he just adds 3 extra years to the contract and he can just, pay it out over, 8 years instead of whatever. So 42% of the contract comes throughout those dummy years. And his thinking is by year 5, the salary cap's going to have gone from 300 million to 400 million. It's going to be 4% of my, allocated cap instead of 12% of my allocated cap. And he just keeps pushing it forward. But again, it could blow up in your face if it's the wrong guy, or if somebody gets hurt, you're paying for him for 6 more years. That hasn't happened yet, but that's the disadvantage. That's the risk they're taking. But they're not taking it on as many players as everyone thinks. It's basically that core.
Well, and that also goes to say you have to move on from a player at the right time, because they moved on from Hargrove.
Right.
right? And that was considered a big loss when the Eagles lost Hargrove, right? Because he signed with San Francisco. And if I remember correctly, didn't Philadelphia and San Francisco play in the NFC title game that year?
They did. Yeah. Yeah.
And San Francisco, Philadelphia won, but then San Francisco had the offseason coup to get that one player that they thought that they needed.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But you have to be able to move on from the player.
And that was the year they did the comp picks. One of y'all mentioned the comp pick game. Howie picks a year that he's going to do it. The year that he's not re-signing, the year he's letting everybody go.
Yeah.
That'll be the year he played the comp pick game. And that was that year. And they got a 3rd round pick for Hargrave from the, Niners. And they ended up with, I think, four or 5 compensatory picks that season. It was a big year for them because of that. But like last year, they knew that they were retaining a lot of guys, signing guys back. They didn't play that game that year. But he picks and chooses that really well too. He tries to get the contracts to coincide so everything can be done, in the same year. This year we're going to do comps, next year we're not, goes back and forth. But yeah, they've hit really big on some of those comp pick years.
David, I had a question when I was looking through. One trade that stood out to me was, let me see if I can find it. It was the Michael Bennett trade when they got it from. So when I was looking at contracts, so this is what kind of popped up when I was looking at contracts. Obviously, it looks like in the draft, he's much more aggressive in trades and things along those lines than the offseason. Offseason, he does his trades, but they're not splash, big market sort of thing. The trade of Michael Bennett was super interesting because I see a lot of one-year contracts in the offseason. And it looked like he sometimes in the offseason looks for players in a minor slump year. Like for Bennett, he was having 12 to 14 sacks in the year. The year that they traded him the year before, he was at 8.5 sacks. Seahawks traded them for a 7th and a 5th rounder, which Michael Bennett in a 7th for a 5th, and Marcus Johnson. And then Bennett ended up getting 78 pressures, 12 sacks, and 22 QB hits with him, then shipped them off to New England. And I thought that was something super impressive that he did. And I was trying to find like similar trades on that, but I couldn't find much. But something like those 1-year deals where he has it planned out from start to finish is very impressive.
Yeah, he tries to do that a lot. I think you picked probably the best example of it. This year, the greatest example would be All-Pro linebacker Zach Bond. They identified a player that was underutilized there in New Orleans, and I mentioned earlier that the Eagles don't spend money at linebacker. That's about to change because they're going to pay him. They don't want him walking out the door. He's changed the complexity of that defense completely. So, yeah, but yeah, that is a good point. He definitely looks for that a lot and tries to get players. A lot of people have accused him, especially in the Philly area over the years, as trying to be the smartest guy in the room because he tried to do that a lot, through the 2010s and it just didn't work. So I think he's learned how to hit better on those here lately. I think he's, gotten a little better at that. And I think he used to take too many swings at a lot. He relied too much on that. I think another year you could look at that would have been 2017 that they had a whole ton. I don't know if they weren't all necessarily traded for, but they were Chris Long and LeGarrette Blount and Patrick Robinson. And I mean, about probably a third of the team was on 1-year or 2-year contracts. And I think that's when he got really, good at those kinds of deals and identifying that, because they don't win a Super Bowl without all those players that year. I mean, that was a huge hit for them.
That's something that I want to go back and look at. So that 1-year deal thing that you're talking about, I know for a fact that Buffalo does the same thing, but I didn't necessarily analyze it as part of this exercise.
Yeah, and nose tackles for Buffalo, just like
right.
1-year deals on all their nose tackles. It was
did
awesome.
the Eagles trade for Darby from Buffalo? Wasn't that a
yeah? Wasn't he part of
the shady deal?
Part of the LaShawn McCoy trade?
Yeah, I think it may have been the shady deal. I don't know.
Yep.
And then our linebacker, who's that linebacker? You guys should have never took him.
He got hurt immediately.
Yeah, Alonzo.
Kiko Alonso.
Yeah.
Woo!
Yeah.
But so obviously Randall and I being Bills fans, we see this like every year in March, Buffalo has like 33 players under contract. and you need 90 to go into camp, right? So you see all of these one-year deals that get handed out sometime between the beginning of the league year and June.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be curious from a roster construction standpoint, is that something that every team does, or is that a select few, right? Like, because so one of the other things, and I like this week, this is one of my favorite weeks to like analyze rosters. So all 4 teams playing have really good linebacking groups. So people can say linebacker is a diminished role. It's not a key position. But if you look at the 4 teams playing, they are getting elite play from a healthy linebacker room.
100%.
Right? And like, from,
yeah,
you know,
evolution of the run game and tight end usage and things like that, that needs that front 4 to be solid so the linebackers can be clean, and it's working, and that's what you can see out of these top 4.
and if you have a weak linebacker, that's a matchup that can be exploited in the playoffs. Meaning, like, if your linebackers can't defend the pass, most teams still playing are good enough to throw to their running backs.
yeah, and running backs, like Randall had mentioned about linebacker, the running game has been really prominent again. You know, that was an undervalued, just like the linebacker position. But yeah, it's definitely trending up. The 2 things I noticed about the 4 teams, it doesn't really have much to do about roster construction, but of the 4 teams remaining in the playoffs, none of their quarterbacks have had turnovers, which is something that was been emphasized. And of the 4 teams, they led the league in 4th down conversions. All 4
I think
teams.
we all saw that stat today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, and it just goes to show that they put an emphasis on some things. Now, I don't know how the roster building necessarily went into that for other teams. I know it plays a part in the Eagles because they invest heavily in the offensive line with the intention of running the ball down your throat on the brotherly shove, tush push, whatever you want to call it. It is a designed thing. I've noticed some other teams that are really good at it too. Obviously, Josh Allen, another quarterback who's amazing at that. But yeah, I that would be an interesting thought to try to figure out how that correlates with the roster construction.
So
Ravens figured it out with Mark Andrews, so they did direct snaps with Mark Andrews, and then Washington, I think, might have been a little bit probably the most pass heavy on 4th down conversions, and they do it well. I mean, Terry McLaurin's a beast on the slants and such.
Yeah.
Do they have Mariota?
They do. They had Mariota on the field for one play, and he got
And
like
it was a
stepped on while
fake
trying
tush
to turn
push,
around.
right?
Yes, that's right.
I don't know why you just take the ball out of Jaden Daniels' hands on a play like that initially to give it to Marcus Mariota. It's a little bit of a questionable decision on the part of the OC, but we'll go with it.
Yeah, agreed.
So here's a couple of other roster facts. So all 4 teams left drafted a quarterback in round 1 or 2. Right? 3 of them in round 1. The Eagles are the outlier with round 2. Okay, this one surprised me. Only 2 of the 4 drafted a left tackle. So the Eagles and the Bills are the only 2 playoff teams that drafted their tackles. Right? So we always hear about you have to have a franchise left tackle. Well, not if you're the Commanders or the Chiefs.
Yeah, that is interesting because the Eagles value that highly.
I was going to say, didn't the Commanders isn't there starting left tackle Brandon Coleman, who's a rookie for them from TCU? So I think.
Yeah, and they corrected me on this in the podcast last night. So the Commanders' website, I thought, had Coleman listed as a guard.
Yeah, so it's really odd because when I was scouting him, the consensus idea was that he would play guard in the NFL, and I liked him a lot as a guard prospect, and they trotted him out left tackle early in the year. And I was like, oh no, this is going to ruin his rookie season. This is terrible. And he's been okay. He's been not great, not the franchise pillar you would talk about when you're talking about the draft picks for these other positions for their teams, but he's been a solid enough rookie start left tackle for them. Will he stay there long term? I think that's a question mark. So it's certainly different than the other teams who have their stable second contract left tackles in place.
And you mentioned
Sam, is that their number 1 need for the draft coming up?
Washington,
tackle and receiver.
Yeah,
I would say receiver depth honestly is probably more important. But even like the interior with Nick Allegretti at left guard and Andrew Wiley at right tackle, I think like Coleman. If Coleman is your third best offensive lineman, you're probably in a solid spot, or you can get away with it. Like, he's not the guy you need to really worry about immediately.
For sure.
Yeah. And you mentioned all 4 teams drafted their quarterback in the first or second round. Drafting a quarterback and starting a quarterback quickly on a rookie deal is like a cheat code, because you have like 40 to 50 extra $1 million to construct your roster with. And that's something the Eagles did on the Jalen Hurts contract. They were able to buy all these guys who we are talking about, and the Bills did it as well when they had Allen on the rookie deal. It is basically like a cheat code. And if you can do that, because you mentioned that a lot of the teams drafted like Tanner McKee, you were mentioning, and stuff. Backup quarterbacks cost a lot of money too. And when the Eagles are paying Kenny Pickett rookie deal money, Tanner McKee 6th round rookie deal money, they don't have any other money invested in that position. And that, it might not seem like a lot to the average person who listens, but having 15, 20 extra million to build your roster with is a big deal.
For sure. But then we're going down like a separate wormhole in there based on how colleges develop quarterbacks and how this day and age in 2024, 2023 and 2024, how some of these quarterbacks aren't ready. So it's almost now you have to like reestablish how you're going to set it up. Either you're going to wait a full year, look at Bryce Young, how we only need like 2 or 3 games off and he kind of figured it out. So it's rough to, like, even with this class, when you're looking at Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders and everybody like that, like, to be honest, I don't think anybody's ready week 1 out of this draft class. So what do? Do you do what you do with Josh Allen and you give them, hey, year 1, you are allowed to fail as much as you want and you learn through failure? Or do you sit behind the bench and say you'll learn behind the bench and then we'll run you out? So there's like so many, and then you're wasting one of those years on that rookie contract, right? So it's almost like, what leg do you take and hope you would succeed at what?
A lot of the teams take a high floor guy like Washington did and Jaden Daniels. I mean, what was he, 24, 25? He was an older quarterback, but of all the quarterbacks drafted, he was the one who I thought would have been able to step in right away. I didn't expect this. I'm not even going down that. I didn't expect anything like this. But he had the highest floor. Like, I thought he, would fail the least, if that makes any sense. He had a very high floor, and they identified the right guy, and they knew that their roster, they wanted to try and win now. So that's what they did. And then other teams like the Packers, how many years did Jordan Love sit? He was drafted the same year Hurts was. And he sat for 3 seasons, I think. I mean, I don't know. It's very hard to build a winner in that manner, in my opinion. I kind of like the way the Bills did it with Josh Allen. Just you throw him to the wolves. If you've identified the guy, you send him out there and you see what you can do.
Well, and the Josh Allen starting as a rookie thing happened because Buffalo had 2 QBs get hurt in the last preseason game.
That kind of how
wasn't that Kyle Orton?
Yeah.
Wentz got hurt. Derek Anderson. Wait, Derek Anderson. It was Derek Anderson and somebody else got injured in the preseason, so Josh had to start the first regular season game. And they said, well, once you start him, you can't sit him. But then he got hurt, so Anderson came back in later in the rookie year.
Yeah, but we also traded or released Tyrod Taylor, right?
We were able to trade him for a third to Cleveland before the season began.
Right. So I think that was more of a telling note that we were going to throw him in the fire eventually, anyways, because Tyrod Taylor took us to the playoffs the year before.
Right, but the point was it wasn't the plan to start Josh. It was never the plan to start Josh, but he did have to start because it was Derek Anderson, and I forgot who the other quarterback. I don't know if it was Kyle Orton or somebody.
I can chime in there. Fun note. So there's a touch on the interception ratios for Bills quarterbacks in that 2018 season. So you have Josh Allen with 10 touchdowns to 12 interceptions. Derek Anderson with 0 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. Nathan Peterman 1 touchdown, 7 interceptions, and Mac Barkley 2 touchdowns, 0 interceptions.
the legendary game by Peterman.
Yep. Okay. Sam with the save. But going back to the Eagles, so David, were you surprised when they paid big money to Barkley?
I wasn't when they did it, because I just kept hearing that they were wanting to do that they had seen the value in missing out in the playoffs the previous year of having a runner who was good at rushing the ball but terrible in pass pro. So they wanted a 3-down back because every time that they took DeAndre Swift off the field, it just alerted every team in the NFL that the Eagles were about to pass because he was, not good in pass pro. So but any other year, yes, it would have floored me. But there was enough rumblings after the way the 2023 season ended because they started off like 10-0 last year or something. It was crazy. And then they, just fell apart, lost 5 of the last 6 and got slapped really badly by the Bucs in the playoffs. So yeah, they went in looking at that. And I think also there, some truth to the fact that Jalen Hurts, they see that how much he benefits in a running game. And they wanted to utilize his strengths now while that is still available. His pass game, they have that worked out if they could ever get some passing concepts, that worked in their offense. But they realize the importance of pairing Jalen Hurts with the dynamic running back. Because for years it had always been, well, the Eagles have such a good line, anybody can run behind them. Well, then the thought came, well, what if we actually had a really good running back there and just instead of somebody average with this line, we could be dynamic. And they made the move to turn the team into a run-heavy offense and to lean on Jalen Hurts' legs and Saquon's legs. So this year it made a lot of sense. Years past, it probably didn't. And I think it was more the dynamic of the player made that happen more than the position. I still don't think it's something the Eagles go into the future thinking, ooh, we're going to start investing heavily in running back again. I think they still see the position generally as something you draft and keep for 4 years and let walk away and never give second contracts to.
How high do you think the Eagles take a running back this year?
This year, probably very late, like 5th round, 6th round, if at all. But because they just used a 4th last year on Will Shipley, I think.
Yep.
Okay.
I was going to say, even like the Barkley contract historically is still a really good deal because it's 3 years, under $40 million. You look back in 2018, Todd Gurley signed a 4-year, $57.5 million contract extension.
Wow. That's a
that
terrible
was how many years ago now? 7 years ago?
Yeah.
And Barkley's getting less than that now.
Right. Yeah, that's a great comparison. I had not looked that up. That's insane.
And
Well,
his 3rd year is barely anything on the contract, right? And guaranteed or anything for Saquon?
I think he only has 20-some million guaranteed, if I'm correct.
Yeah. The 3rd year is a super easy out for them.
Right.
I definitely want to compliment all 3 of you on the research in the chat. Like, all you guys took this really seriously, and we were like, who's covering what? Who's got this research? And you guys are bringing out facts that I didn't even see in the chat. So this is really cool.
I'm super impressed with.
I got a front row seat. I'm just listening to you guys. Wow. Okay, I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
I'm super impressed with Sam and Randall because I assure you, if this was flipped and we were doing a Bills or whoever your team is, Sam, I wouldn't have a clue. I would not.
Sam, who is your team?
I wouldn't be
it's Pittsburgh, unfortunately.
Pittsburgh.
So,
there you go.
I'll live in infamy with every season I have a winning season. It's fantastic until we get to the final month or so, and I'm just all right, time to look at draft prospects.
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't contribute to y'all's conversations at all. But Sam, I do have on my website, I have a very fun exercise that one of the writers on my website did. What if Howie Roseman did the 2025 draft for the Pittsburgh Steelers? So it's a pretty interesting write-up if you want to check it out.
Yeah, I definitely actually need to look at that. That'll be super fun.
Yep. So we should definitely pause for a quick commercial. So I want to kind of give everybody a chance to let them know where you can find your content. I know I definitely want to say thank you to Sam for coming on the show again. This is your 2nd time here. But you want to let everybody know kind of who you are, how they can find your content.
Yeah, so you can follow me at Sam_Teets33 on Twitter. I write for Substack primarily for my own account called Sports Talk for Sam Teets, where I'm posting daily scouting reports, all conference teams, some NFL All-Pro stuff too. But of course, I have some live Senior Bowl content as well from when I go down there next week. So you can check it all out. You want to see daily scouting reports. Primarily, that's what I'm focusing on right now. We're starting to get into 2026 stuff, but still rolling out all my 2025 reports. You can check that out. It's just super free. There's nothing paid for. Go to Substack, or Sports Talk with Sam Teets, or just Sam Teets. I guarantee I'll be the only thing that pops up. And you can go ahead, just subscribe with your email for free, and you get my daily reports, and you can get access to more than 200 reports for this class already.
So definitely want to second getting Sam's scouting reports. If you're familiar with Locked On Scouting, Kyle Krabs gave Sam a good shout out about a week ago. So Sam's scouting reports, second to none. So Randall, want to let everybody know how they can find you.
Yeah, you can just find me on Twitter at Randall Slifer or Blue Sky, same exact way. Doing draft content with draft professors and Jim, and I do all my stuff through there.
Cool. And David, welcome back. You want to let everybody know how they can find you?
Yeah, you can find everything I do at PHL Eagle News, or you can go to phillysportsnetwork.com. That's who I write for. And definitely give all these guys a follow, Jim, Randall, and Sam. I'm in like a Discord chat with them during the day, and I only check into that thing like one time a day, but I end up reading for like 25 minutes. Y'all have forgotten more draft content than I will ever learn. It is extremely impressive what all of y'all have done. I mean, this just blows my mind. I barely ever say anything in there because I'm reading everything and I'm thinking, oh my God, but I have nothing to contribute to this. Like it is insane, y'all's draft content. Like I thought I was a draft nerd, but y'all have taken me completely and humbled me. So it is amazing. So definitely give all of them a follow. In fact, Sam, I don't even think I knew how to your handle. So when you were saying it, I was looking you up then. So I just followed you as well. But I think I already was following Randall and Jim.
Well, you can follow the channel at NFL Draft Fanatic. No, I am Fanatic. It is the same handle on X, Twitter, and YouTube. And we have daily draft content. So every single day on this channel is a podcast about the draft, whether it's positional rankings, scouting reports, team building. On Friday this week, we are doing our first 32 GM mock. So we will have 4 people podcasting the entire mock. The other 28 people will all be in the chat, typing in their picks and probably mocking the picks of everybody that was picked ahead of them. So that should be a lot of fun. It is from 7 to 10 p.m. Eastern on Friday. So if you want to be notified of any of that content, follow the page on X and you just turn on notifications so you don't miss a tweet. But thank you. So I guess to close this out, do we want to like do some Eagles predictions, or like Sam, like when you're looking at the Eagles playing in the NFC Championship game, what are you going to be thinking as you're watching the game?
I'm going to be thinking about what can you get, like what value and what emphasis do they put on some of these young players, specifically on the defensive line. Like we saw Nolan Smith, obviously, this past week. Smith was a guy who I had as a top 16 player in the class when he came out. Was very raw as a pass rusher. Had basically no pass rush plan whatsoever, but was a really elite athlete and much stronger than his frame would suggest. So I want to see what you can continuously get from him. I want to see more Moro Ojomo, because obviously I liked him coming out. I want to see what Jalen Hunt can do. I want to see what you can get from these young guys here as you may be prepared to lose a Milton Williams, and you obviously had Brandon Graham out with injury. So I want to see what some of these younger players can do for you. And I'm really impressed with their projection and their trajectory right now as young players. But I want to see what they can do more in these big games and how many snaps they get from this defense.
And David, do you think we've seen a defense this young in a conference championship before?
I can't think of one. No. And even the veterans that were supposed to be there aren't. Like Brandon Graham, he's gone. Bryce Huff, who they thought they were going to be able to lean on, he did not even play a snap in the game versus the Rams. In fact, those snaps went to who Sam just mentioned, Jalen Hunt. He had 17 snaps in that game and a sack. They have gotten huge contributions from their rookies. I mean, I can't think of any time. And Nolan Smith, like you said, he was raw. He had a really high pressure rate in college, but he just didn't get home a lot. But in this playoffs, he has 10 pressures, which is third most in the postseason so far. So it's been like a coming out party for him. And Jalen Carter, obviously, he's been, incredibly dominant throughout the whole season and the playoffs. But no, with the way Quignon has played and Cooper DeJean, and you throw in, like I said, the other 2 rookies I just mentioned and Jalen Hunt. I have never seen a team that the Eagles have had go this far with a defense that young. And I think they finished number one overall in the league too, which is just crazy statistically. I think they were number one for the first time since 1991. And if y'all are old enough, everybody would remember that defense because it had Jerome Brown, Reggie White. That defense was just ridiculously stacked. And this defense ended up with the same standings, which is just insane 34 years later.
I do think I remember that 91 Eagles team because that had Randall Cunningham on it, right?
Yeah, it did.
And that was that the year that like Bruce Smith almost tackled him in the end zone and then he throws like a 99-yard pass to Michael Quick?
That was the year before. The 91 year is actually the year Bryce Paup of the Packers sacked him and broke his leg on the first week of the season. So that entire 1991 defense that allowed like some crazy like 10 points a game average was all for nothing because they could not score any points.
Was that the Jim McMahon?
It was.
Okay, I still remember. I still remember. I was just off by a year.
Yep, just 1 year, yep.
So, Randall, what do you think you're going to be looking at when you're watching the Eagles play on Sunday?
To be honest, I'm going to be kind of watching more of the Washington Commanders and see how they kind of attack Philadelphia and what Philadelphia is going to do to make them press the panic button. Because to be honest, watching Jaden Daniels last week, I thought that he would at least get some rookie jitters in him and see kind of pull the trigger on a couple things that he shouldn't, things along those lines. So how Philadelphia gets Jaden Daniels to pull a panic button to get a turnover and things along those lines is what, in my opinion, could be the difference of the game.
And I will say, like, having Nolan Smith, who is really just a freak athlete, and Jake Hunt, who's a former converted safety, having those two more athletic edge rushers will probably be very helpful for Philly because you'll have some speed there, maybe catch up to Jaden Daniels a little bit.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned the rookies. That's a great conversation to have because the Commanders are there with Jaden Daniels, who's obviously a rookie, and one of my favorite corners from last year, Mike Sainristil. Is that how you say his last name?
Oh, yeah.
He has been locked down, and he locked down A.J. Brown in one of the games too. I mean, he has been absolutely amazing. He was my favorite. I had him as like a slot corner, but man, they've utilized him all over. He has just been dominating. So that's a really great point. The way the rookies play in a big game of this magnitude could decide, the outcome.
Well, and because the Eagles defense is young, so one of my questions is will the game be too big? Now, granted, even though they're young, they played at Georgia, right? This isn't their first big football game, right? But will the lights be too big kind of thing? But I could also say the same thing about the Commanders,
exactly.
Right? Is the stage going to be too big? And did somebody here say that no quarterback that's playing has turned the ball over in the playoffs?
Yeah, there have been no interceptions at all from any of the four quarterbacks.
Yeah, that just blew me away.
Yeah, protecting the ball. I mean, that's been the Eagles' game plan, right? The whole game plan is run Saquon, play great defense, and hoard the ball. An Eagles beat writer, Reuben Franks, came up with the stat. Jalen Hurts has thrown 178 passes in the postseason without an interception, which is the third longest streak in NFL history. And that's their formula. And the Eagles haven't had to they haven't been behind because of how good the defense is. So they really haven't had to utilize the passing game that much. I mean, A.J. Brown has basically been, completely absent from the entire postseason run here. So the biggest interesting thing that could happen to me is if they fell behind like 10 points and had to throw. One score isn't going to cause it, but two scores would maybe put them in a position that they haven't been in 14 weeks.
Right. Yeah, right now it's kind of you're waiting on that 70-yard Saquon Barkley run when it comes to the final 2 minutes of the first half or like third quarter, you get that big breakout run from Barkley. Then he'll put you away later in the fourth quarter as well. But you're just kind of waiting on that moment.
It happens.
They get their explosive plays from a running back, which is insane because since week 11, Jalen hasn't had a single pass for over 35 yards, which is really crazy. He had 14 of them the first, 10 weeks and 0 since. So yeah, it's exactly what Sam just said. They're waiting for the explosive play to come from Saquon's legs. I guess that's how they say it there.
There you go.
Cool. Well, we should probably wind down. We're at about an hour here, and I'm sure that the four of us could keep talking for a long time because this is just too much fun. But we should just kind of close it down and say, from my standpoint, thank you to all three of you for helping put this together. And in some cases, we were doing a lot of research over, let's say, the last 2 days. So I appreciate the efforts that all three of you put in to make this episode work. Thank you. And we will see all of the people watching and listening. We will see you on a podcast again tomorrow. But for Randall, Sam, David, myself, and the 30 podcasters at the Draft Professor, thank you very much for watching, and have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching this episode of Mrs. R Relevant, the Daily Draft Podcast, brought to you by the Draft Professor. Please follow the Draft Professor on X at NFL Draft Fanatic, no I in Fanatic. Please follow the Draft Professor channel on YouTube at NFL Draft Fanatic, no I in Fanatic. We look forward to seeing you on our podcast tomorrow.